The top advisor to President George W. Bush on the environment in both of Bush's terms in office is now an executive at Constellation Energy, which operates about 36 power plants all over the country. And the chief of staff to that top environmental advisor to President Bush, the first one, left the Bush administration to join a little environmental startup firm you might have heard of called ExxonMobil. The man who became environmental chief of staff after the first guy, the ExxonMobil guy, left, his post-Bush administration job is lobbyist for the American Petroleum Institute. The director of communications for the top environmental advisor to President Bush from the middle of the Bush years, that person became director of communications for the National Petrochemical and Refiners Association. You noticing a theme here? It goes even further down the masthead. President Bush's associate director of the Council on Environmental Quality for Environmental Protection is now a lobbyist for Shell Oil. Yes, this very well-trod career path from environmental job in the Bush administration to oil-soaked corporate fat cat in the energy industry was charted today in a new report from Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. It's helpful to keep in mind as the world convenes in Denmark to try to do something about climate change, and as America's conservatives lead the charge to stop the world from doing anything about climate change. Republican Senator Jim Inhofe of Oklahoma has for months been breathlessly talking up his own planned trip to Copenhagen to try to undermine President Obama's visit there next week.
Now, I'm going to go to Copenhagen. I think somebody has to be there, a one-man truth squad. I have been the lead senator standing up and exposing the science, the cost, and the hysteria behind global warming alarmism. And I will be traveling to Copenhagen, leading what has been called in the media as the truth squad.
The Truth Squad, his one-man Truth Squad, is actually now a three-man Truth Squad because Senator Inhofe has persuaded a couple of friends to go with him to Copenhagen. Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming will be going, and someone whose identity Senator Inhofe said until recently was a secret.
And John Barrasso's going with you, right?
Yeah.
John Barrasso?
Barrasso, and there's another secret person going with me. We're going to have a team of three, a truth squad of three.
There's another secret person going with me, a secret person. After lots of speculation about who Senator Inhofe's secret person might be, his secret climate change denying friend, could it be Sarah Palin? Today, we finally learned out who it actually is. The identity of the third member of the Jim Inhofe Climate Change Denialist Truth Squad going to Copenhagen has been revealed in a cloud of anticlimax. It is Roger Wicker. Roger Wicker, who not many people know, is a United States Senator from Mississippi. He's actually the man who was appointed to replace Trent Lott as Senator, so Mr. Lott could retire urgently to become a lobbyist. Again, there's that theme. Cutting out the lobbyist middleman, oil billionaire David Koch, who inherited the giant oil and chemical company Koch Industries from his dad. David Koch is using his Tea Party pressure group, Americans for Prosperity, to send its own political operatives to Copenhagen to try to undercut President Obama there. They had planned to broadcast live from Copenhagen on the same day President Obama was planning to visit the conference. That plan itself was undercut when the president changed his travel plans to not be going until the end of next week. As President Obama prepares for his trip to Copenhagen next week, today he met with former Vice President Al Gore in the Oval Office. But as he prepares to go now, at least there's no mystery and really no subtlety at all about who and what he is up against. Joining us now is Melanie Sloan, Executive Director of CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Melanie, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Always a pleasure.
I have to ask if you were surprised by your own report, by how many of the top environmental officials from the Bush administration are now working for the energy companies.
Right. Well, first, maybe it's a little bit of a misnomer to call them environmental officials in the first place, maybe anti-environmental officials. So no, it's not really a surprise. Most of them were busy carrying the industry's water while they were in the Bush administration in the first place.
Is there an important takeaway from all this politically, though? Is there something we should be learning from this information about the career choices of the, as you say, sort of environmental officials from the Bush administration?
Yeah, I think you could take away that when people come from the oil companies and the energy companies and go into the administration to work on environmental matters, they're probably not worrying about the interests of the American people as much as they are worrying about the interests of the big oil companies that helped get them there in the first place.
Well, two of the former Bush administration officials who you cited in the Crew report have another employer in common on their resumes. They've been people who've been employed by Republican Senator Jim Inhofe of the Climate Change Denying Truth Squad. I'm assuming that's really no coincidence, that this is a rather tight-knit and self-promoting group.
Right, that seems unlikely to be a coincidence. One of them worked for Inhofe before he joined the Council on Environmental Equality, and one joined Inhofe after he left the council, although both ultimately ended up working for energy. One worked for First Energy and the other worked for the National Petrochemical Association, a trade industry group.
Crew has done so much to monitor the sort of and document really the revolving door between industry and administration officials. But one of the things that I think is important in policy development generally is the expertise of former officials, people who've had policy-making jobs in previous administrations, who therefore have the expertise about how legislation affects what the government actually does, about how policy actually hits the road when it actually goes into effect, and that those people can be a real asset in the debate, even globally going forward, about what countries ought to do about the problems that vex us. Are we in sort of a unique situation where the people who ought to have the policy expertise about the environment are all people who are tied up in industry, and so there really aren't any disinterested people who are able to contribute the way that other former officials have?
Well, that does seem to be a particular problem here, but I would say that there are probably officials who could have handled these jobs, but the Bush administration always had a goal, and that was to undercut climate change from day one. So the people they brought into the administration were there to help undercut climate change, as we saw with Phil Cooney, for example, the CEQ chief of staff who was busy rewriting scientific data and ultimately had to leave over that. But they were there to undercut climate change, and so it's no surprise that they come in to undercut climate change and then go back to the energy companies where they came from in the first place. I think you would not see such a thing from the Obama administration, for example. It seems very unlikely that people are coming to the Council on Environmental Quality and are going to leave and promptly turn around and work for Shell Oil.
Unless something really profound happens to Shell Oil. I think I agree with you. Melanie Sloan, Executive Director of Crew, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Nice to be here.